If you've been thinking about getting serious with your money, like actually serious, now's the time. The Motley Fool is offering new members 50% off their iconic stock recommendation service, Stock Advisor. This is the same service that's crushed the market with recommendations that have returned 1,057% since inception, compared to the S&P 500's 180% over that same period. This isn't guesswork. The Motley Fool has a track record of finding companies before they become household names. So if you want to invest smarter and you like saving money while doing it, go to fool.com/listen to claim your 50% off discount off a 1-year term of Stock Advisor. Again, that's fool.com/listen. Returns of 1,057% are from the Motley Fool's product Stock Advisor and measured against S&P 500 returns of 180% as of July 10th, 2025. Past performance is not an indicator of future results. All investing involves a risk of loss. Individual investment results may vary.
What happens when an ex-boyfriend becomes the obvious suspect? A friend agrees to testify for a plea deal, and cell phone technology from 1999 passes for reliable evidence. Well, you get a murder conviction that looks solid for 15 years, up until someone starts asking the uncomfortable questions that should have been asked from the very beginning. Let me start by telling you about Hae Min Lee, because in all the legal circus that followed her death, we sometimes forget the story that began with an 18-year-old girl who had plans that she'd never got to keep. January 13th, 1999, Hae was a senior at Woodlawn High School in Baltimore, the kind of responsible teenager who worked at LensCrafters and picked up her little cousin from school every day. She was also dating someone new while navigating the complicated waters of staying friends with her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed. That afternoon, Hae left school around 2:15 p.m. with a routine ahead of her: pick up her cousin, then head to work. Except she never showed up for either. When you're the reliable kid who always shows up, your absence goes noticed immediately. Her family reported her missing that same day. For a month, Baltimore lived with the hope that maybe she'd run away, maybe she was hiding somewhere, maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Then, on February 9th, 1999, a passerby found her in Lincoln Park. The autopsy revealed manual strangulation. Hope died along with those findings. What happened next would shape the next 26 years of legal proceedings, podcast episodes, and arguments about justice in America. Baltimore police had a murder on their hands, and they followed the most basic rule of homicide investigation. When a young woman turns up dead, you start with the people closest to her. In Hae's case, that meant her ex-boyfriend, Adnan. But here's where the story gets its first twist. The police didn't focus on Syed because of brilliant detective work or compelling evidence. They got an anonymous phone call on February 12, 1999, 3 days before finding Hae's body. The caller directed their attention to Adnan. And just like that, the investigation had its primary suspect. Anonymous tips can be valuable in investigations, but they can also create tunnel vision. When you're convinced you know who did it, you tend to interpret everything through that lens. This is a theme that would echo throughout the entire case. February 28, 1999, they arrested Adnan for Hae's murder. He was only 17. The prosecution's case against Syed was like a house built on a foundation of quicksand, but it looked solid enough from the outside. They had two main pillars holding everything together, and both would prove problematic years later. The first pillar was Jay Wilds, a friend of Adnan, who became the state's star witness. Wilds claimed that on January 13, 1999, Adnan had confessed to killing Hae and asked for help burying her body in Lincoln Park. According to Wilds, Adnan showed him Hae's body in the trunk of her car, and they buried her together that evening. This testimony came with a price tag. Jay Wilds was charged as an accessory to murder, but received a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation, a 5-year suspended sentence. In other words, testify against your friend and walk away free. The incentive structure here is about as subtle as a neon sign. The second pillar was cell phone tower data from Adnan's mobile phone. This was 1999, remember, when cell phones were still relatively new and the science of cellular location tracking was in its infancy. The prosecution used this data to argue that Adnan's phone was in the vicinity of the park on the evening of January 13th, which would corroborate Wild's testimony about the burial. Here's what made this evidence compelling to a jury in 2000. It was high-tech and seemingly objective. Unlike human testimony, which can be unreliable and motivated by self-interest, cell phone data looked scientific and neutral. The prosecution presented it as definitive proof of Adnan's location. And here's what made it problematic in hindsight. The technology wasn't nearly as reliable as it appeared, especially for incoming calls. But the jury didn't know that because nobody told them. Adnan Syed's first trial began in December 1999 and promptly fell apart. The jurors overheard a sidebar dispute between the attorneys, and the judge declared a mistrial. The second trial started in January 2000 and lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution painted Adnan as a jealous ex-boyfriend who couldn't handle Hay moving on. They had Jay Wilds pointing the finger directly at him, and they had cell phone data that seemed to confirm his story. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Wilds couldn't be trusted. On February 25, 2000, the jury found Adnan Syed guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and robbery. Judge Wanda Hurd sentenced him to life in prison plus 30 years. Case closed. Justice served. Everyone go home. Except, of course, it wasn't that simple. Even at the time, there were cracks in this foundation of Syed's conviction. His defense attorney, Cristina Gutierrez, made some decisions that would later be called into question. Most significantly, she never contacted Asia McClain. She's a classmate who had written to Adnan while he was in jail awaiting trial. In her letters, she said that she had been with Adnan at the Woodlawn Public Library on January 13th during the exact time the prosecution said the murder occurred. This could have been a powerful alibi witness, but Gutierrez never followed up. She also didn't aggressively challenge the cell phone evidence, despite the fact that there were reasons to question the reliability. An AT&T cover sheet that came with the phone records contained a disclaimer stating that incoming calls were not reliable for determining location. This disclaimer was never shown to the jury. These were more than just minor oversights. They were strategic decisions that would later form the basis of ineffective assistance of counsel claims. But in 2000, they were water under the bridge. Syed was convicted, his appeals were denied, and he settled into life as inmate number 187-524A. For a decade and a half, Adnan Syed was just another forgotten name in America's vast prison population. His case occasionally surfaced with local appeals courts, but it never really gained traction. The conviction looked solid enough to withstand scrutiny, and the justice system moved on to newer cases. During those years, Adnan maintained his innocence while working toward a college degree behind bars. His family continued to believe in his innocence and occasionally reached out to lawyers and journalists, hoping someone would take another look at the case. Meanwhile, the world around him changed. Cell phone technology evolved from a novelty to a necessity. DNA testing became more sophisticated and routine. True crime entertainment exploded in popularity, from shows like CSI to documentaries about wrongful convictions. But none of that mattered to Adnan's case. He remained locked away, his story known to only family, friends, and the occasional legal advocate who wondered if something had gone wrong in Baltimore County Circuit Court back in 2000. Then, Sarah Koenig happened. In 2013, Rabia Chaudhry, a family friend of the Syeds, contacted Sarah Koenig, a producer at This American Life. Chaudhry had been following the case for years and believed that Adnan had been wrongfully convicted. She asked Sarah Koenig to take a look at the evidence. What Koenig found intrigued her enough to spend a year of investigating. She interviewed dozens of people connected to the case, pored over the documents, and visited key locations in Baltimore. What emerged wasn't a simple story of guilt or innocence, but a complex examination of how the justice system handles ambiguous evidence. In October 2014, Koenig launched Serial, a podcast that would change everything. Each episode was a deep dive into a different aspect of Adnan's case, from the reliability of Jay Wilds' testimony to the significance of cell phone tower data to the effectiveness of Adnan's legal representation. Serial wasn't the first true crime podcast, but it was the first to achieve massive mainstream success. Millions of people, including myself, downloaded each episode, discussed theories on Reddit, and debated Adnan's guilt or innocence over dinner. The podcast won numerous awards and sparked countless imitators. More importantly, it created what was known as the serial effect, the phenomenon of a podcast or other non-traditional media source driving significant change in a criminal case. This was different from the CSI effect, where fictional shows create unrealistic expectations about forensic evidence. Serial was presenting itself as real journalism, real investigation, and it was reaching conclusions that differed from the original trial. What made Serial so compelling wasn't that it definitely proved Adnan's innocence. Instead, it raised enough reasonable questions about his guilt to make listeners wonder if justice had truly been served. The podcast highlighted Jay Wilde's changing story. His accounts of events had shifted multiple times during police interviews, including crucial details like where he first saw Hayes' body. For a prosecution case built largely on his testimony, these inconsistencies were problematic. Serial also questioned the reliability of the cell phone evidence. Koenig spoke with experts who explained that the technology in '99 wasn't precise enough to definitively place a phone at a specific location. The podcast examined Asia McClain's potential alibi testimony and questioned why Gutierrez never contacted her. It looked at the timeline of events and whether the prosecution's version of when the murder occurred made logical sense. Maybe most effectively, Serial presented all of this in Koenig's conversational, questioning voice. She didn't claim to have solved the case, but she made it clear that reasonable doubt existed. For millions of listeners, that was enough to believe that Adnan Syed deserved another chance at justice. The renewed media attention sparked immediate legal action. In February 2015, Syed's team filed for post-conviction relief, arguing that Cristina Gutierrez had provided ineffective assistance by failing to contact Asia McClain and not challenging the unreliable cell phone evidence. Initially, the strategy worked. Judge Martin Welch granted a new trial in June 2016, and the Maryland Court of Special Appeals affirmed this decision in March 2018. But the legal system has institutional inertia, and in March 2019, the Maryland Supreme Court reversed everything in a 4-3 ruling. They acknowledged Gutierrez's performance was deficient, but ruled it wasn't prejudicial enough to change the outcome. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal in November 2019, effectively ending this chapter. For 5 years, Syed remained simultaneously the most famous, potentially wrongfully convicted person in America and someone the courts refused to actually declare wrongfully convicted. The story could have ended there, but what happened next would make everything that came before look simple by comparison.